If you want to dominate your fantasy football drafts this year, you're in the right place. Because today I'm going to be breaking down the 10 players I believe are the best picks in fantasy drafts right now. And if you're not familiar, I'm Sal Vetri. I've been helping people win their fantasy leagues for nearly 8 years, and I plan to do the same for you in this video. And we're going to start with the first player, and let me make this very clear. If I just had to say the 10 best overall players, that would be ranking just the top 10 players in round one. That's not what we're doing here. We are breaking down exactly based on value, the rounds that you can get these players in, the pockets of positions and where you want to target them. That's what we're breaking down here. And the first player I want to talk about is George Pickens, who is one of the most talented downfield receivers in the NFL. The problem was these past couple of seasons to start his career, he was trapped in the Steelers offense, a run-first offense with bad quarterback play basically these last 3 years. And this was a guy last season who finished as the wide receiver 35, just 11.7 fantasy points per game. Like, that's not anything crazy. And believe it or not, that was his best finish in fantasy in 3 seasons in the NFL. I mean, that is absolutely brutal. But when you start to dive into the numbers more, this guy was expected to score 16 points. Let me show you. Based on his usage, where he was getting open and how he was performing, Pickens was expected to score 16.7 fantasy points per game and finish as the wide receiver 18 in fantasy. But because his bad quarterback play, uncatchable targets, he only had 11.7 points and finished as the wide receiver 35. So this was a top 20 receiver last year based on just how purely he was playing. It was the quarterback play that drew him just negative. He had uncatchable targets and a bad situation. In fact, last year, only 67% of his targets were catchable, meaning 33%. 1 out of every 3 targets he got was not catchable, 71st in the NFL. Let me just show you exactly what that means. George Pickens had 103 targets last year. This literally means that 31 to 33 of these targets was not catchable. They were pointless. They were underthrown, overthrown, out of bounds. They were just not catchable. And then you could take it another step further. Last year, George Pickens on 103 targets only had 3 touchdowns, but he was expected to have more. You could see Ryan Heath here on Twitter. He says, I compared expected versus actual touchdowns last year for fantasy relevant players, and he notes that Trey McBride, George Pickens, the Vikings backfield, and Chase Brown were the most unlucky candidates last year. So the most unlucky wide receiver in the NFL when it came to touchdowns was George Pickens. Not only was he not seeing catchable targets, he was being unlucky because of some of those uncatchable targets in the red zone. But now all of that should change because he's no longer on the Steelers. He's now on the Cowboys. A Cowboys offense that, of course, CeeDee Lamb, a goated wide receiver who has a potential to see 170 plus targets, honestly, this year and every year, right, when he's healthy and Dak's healthy. But outside of that, no competition for Pickens. And if we're talking about it, CeeDee Lamb does a lot of his work in the middle parts of the field, out of the slot, short to intermediate parts, where George Pickens can work primarily as the outside wide receiver downfield and maybe threaten for double-digit touchdowns, threaten to rank top 5 to top 10 in explosive plays like he did last year on a bad Steelers offense, because his only competition after this is Jalen Tolbert. Okay, there's not much here out of a third-round rookie who they once thought they would get a lot out of. KaVontae Turpin, who they re-signed, mostly a special teams and speed player. They traded for Jonathan Mingo, a former 4th-round pick, or they traded a 4th-round pick for him from the Carolina Panthers. He's done nothing. This offense right now in terms of the passing attack is obviously CeeDee Lamb 1, but George Pickens as a clear number 2 in a top 5 potential passing volume offense, and then a tight end in Jake Ferguson. All the potential in the world for George Pickens. Because if you think about it, when Dak Prescott is healthy, this guy throws the rock, right? Just 2 years ago, his last healthy season, 590 pass attempts. And basically anytime that Dak Prescott is healthy, this passing offense for Dallas, which we would expect to be pass heavy this year, they haven't invested in the running back position. They're basically only investing in the wide receiver position, trading for Jonathan Mingo, trading for George Pickens, re-signing KaVontae Turpin, right? This is an offense that's expected to pass the ball again, and basically throughout his entire career, Dak Prescott has been able to sustain 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers. And this tweet by Hayden Winks backs that up. Looking at wide receiver usage over the past 2 seasons, the Cowboys are first in expected fantasy points for wide receivers, and they're also first in actual fantasy points for wide receivers. This is over the last 2 seasons, which includes last year where Dak Prescott missed a lot of the second half of the season. Let's keep this in mind. Whether it was back in the day when Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb were working together, whether it was years where we had guys like, Michael Gallup and Amari Cooper. You had last year, a couple years ago, Brandon Cooks and CeeDee Lamb. Brandon Cooks was a fantasy relevant receiver, believe it or not, down the stretch. But now this is George Pickens, who is not a 30-year-old Brandon Cooks. He's in the prime of his career, and he's one of the most explosive downfield players in the NFL. So when I start to piece all this together, and I see George Pickens going as the 68th overall player, it's like around 6 or 7 pick. He's no longer in the Matt Canada Steelers offense that ranked in the 3 years that George Pickens was there, 24th, 25th, and 27th in passing yards per game. He's no longer in that bottom 5 passing offense and top 10 rushing offense. It's now reversed. He's in a top 10 passing offense and probably bottom 10 rushing offense. So I love George Pickens where he goes in this range of the draft. If you can start your draft with like an elite running back, maybe you land a Christian McCaffrey, a Jahmyr Gibbs in round 1, and then you go load up and you get a couple of wide receivers, maybe an elite quarterback in round 3 or 4, and then in round 6, you can go out here and get George Pickens as like your maybe wide receiver 3 or flex option. That feels very strong in terms of the upside. And just imagine, we hope it doesn't happen, but imagine if CeeDee Lamb missed time. Imagine if CeeDee Lamb missed 3 to 5 plus games. George Pickens is instantly a top 12 fantasy receiver. Now, the next player who I believe is one of the best picks currently where he goes in fantasy drafts right now is the rookie first-round pick for the Carolina Panthers, Tetairoa McMillan. He's not just another rookie wide receiver, because this guy was one of the most, and he actually was the most productive wide receiver in college football over the past 2 seasons. In fact, Tetairoa McMillan had over 1,300 yards in back-to-back years, the only rookie wide receiver in this class to say that he did that, including last year with over 1,300 yards, 84 catches despite playing hurt basically all year. And here's the thing that I really love. I love when guys can earn targets at an elite alpha level. 2 years ago, 28% target share is in the elite tier. Anything above 27% starts to become elite. Then last year, a 31% target share. We're talking about top 1% of producers at earning targets compared to the other players on their team. That just shows that you are the guy in your offense. Your coaches, your quarterbacks, everybody trusts you. Probably means because you're getting open and you're productive either after the catch or at the catch point. So we know he has the production. He also has this perfect NFL X wide receiver size, 6'4", 219 pounds. He's kind of in a lot of ways built like a T. Higgins, different types of players and styles of players, right? Built like a Drake London as well in those ways, right? He goes to his pro day, I believe he ended up running this one at, and he runs a 4.58 40 time, which at his size is solid, 81st percentile according to Player Profiler. We'll take that. He doesn't win as being a speedster downfield, but it was nice to see a solid 40 time. He's definitely not slow by any means. So has the athleticism and the size, has the productive background, and now he just got the draft capital, top 10 overall pick on an offense that has no target competition. And then you look at reception perception. Matt Harmon, he looks at every single receivers a couple of games per year in college and in the NFL when they're veterans, and he basically looks at their routes, and you can see right here against zone coverage, which he'll mostly see 81st percentile, that's good. And then he says right here 80th percentile against press coverage, which is also very good. If you're talking about a rookie X wide receiver who has size, if you're going to succeed in the NFL, you better be able to get open against press coverage. And honestly, when you look at it, like right now, who else is going to be the guy on this team? Okay, they're trying to hype up Xavier Legette. He did nothing last year, although as a rookie, he did battle injuries, but probably got drafted a little bit early, probably was mostly just like a traits player that they're trying to develop. We'll see if that happens this year. Adam Thielen, who's now 34 years old, he'll probably start in the slot. He'll actually be competing, believe it or not, with Hunter Renfrow, who apparently when he's been healthy in camp has been lighting it up right now. Missed a couple of weeks with an injury, but he seems to be good right now. And then the biggest competition for Tetairoa McMillan could actually be Jalen Colker, who last year was a rookie and has started to outproduce Xavier Legette down the stretch. All that to say, though, there's no competition for Tetairoa McMillan. Like he was doing in college, earning 28 and 31% of his team's targets, he could do that in the NFL this year, which would be insane. It's also good to point out that this offense was ascending last year. I mean, this was one of the best offenses in the NFL down the stretch. Bryce Young was looking good. This team over their final 7 games under Dave Canales was averaging over 25 real-life points per game. They were a top 10 offense easily last year. And then you take into account that Bryce Young probably is going to be more confident this year. The offensive line clearly improved with the there we go. Whoa, we're talking too fast. That's what I do. I'm sorry, right? Whatever. I'm an Italian from New York. What are you going to do? The offensive line play improved last year. Interior play, especially when they invested in their guard position, it paid off. We expect him to be, not like a top 5 offensive line, but probably middle of the pack. And that's all you have to be to not ruin your offense. And for what it's worth, in the preseason action that we have seen, Tetairoa McMillan looked like a true number 1 receiver. As you can see from my tweet right here, he played 100% of the first team offense snaps with Bryce Young, and he caught 2 of his targets for 43 yards. This is a guy in Tetairoa McMillan who, based on all camp reports, the Athletics reporting this, they're going to all the mini camps, they're talking to the beat reporters there, they're saying, yeah, the entire offense right now is being built not through Chuba Hubbard, not through whoever else you want to maybe say, all through their first round, top 10 overall pick, Tetairoa McMillan, which makes sense. He is a clear target right now if we pull this up, which is just insane to me that this guy is going in round 6 right now. Sometimes he goes in round 5, right? A lot of the times he does, but he's going 61st overall in round 6. Odds are if you're in like a competitive league, he'll get steamed up. He's got a lot of hype for good reason. Probably going round 5. And honestly, I love picking him there. So now if you think about the guys we just talked about, Tetairoa McMillan, who's going in, let's just say round 5, George Pickens, who often goes in round 6 right now. If you could start your draft with that elite running back, we'll call it Christian McCaffrey or something in round 1, then best available in round 2, maybe like a Drake London or a Devon Achane, then an elite quarterback, and then, maybe round 4, you get like a George Pickens or George Kittle, he falls to you, and then round 5 and 6, you can get a wide receiver 1 on his team with top 10 overall upside in Tetairoa McMillan, and George Pickens, who has the ability to be like this year's T. Higgins, a wide receiver 2 on his team who could still finish top 5 or top 10 in fantasy. Now, I love that start to drafts, but if you were not to go elite quarterback, and that's fine, especially based on your league settings or how people draft in your league, well, then I think going a late round quarterback in Brock Purdy makes a lot of sense right now, because this guy in his entire career so far has averaged a top 10 finish last year, top 10 finish the year before that. As a rookie, he finished 29th, but if you look at only the games he started, also finished top 10. He's literally been one of the quietest top 10 fantasy quarterbacks the last 3 seasons, and there's only a handful of guys who can say they've been in the top 10 in points per game each of those years. And if you think about it, last year, he did this without Brandon Ayuk, without Deebo Samuel healthy all year, without Christian McCaffrey, with Trent Williams banged up on the offensive line, and he was still able to finish top 10 with a secondary unit as like Juwan Jennings is the #1 target on the team the second half of the year. Let's look at this. The last 3 years, Brock Purdy, since entering the NFL, fantasy points per drop back, right? This is like the best indicator of your fantasy success. Overall, it skews towards rushing quarterbacks. Lamar, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Justin Fields, Jaden Daniels. These are all elite rushing quarterbacks, right? Who's the only guy on that list who's not an elite rushing quarterback? Brock Purdy, because he plays in an extremely efficient offense. He himself is very efficient, and he's also like kind of quietly giving you 20, 25 rushing yards a game in some weeks, lots of weeks. Okay, so we like that. Now let's look at this, because this is a very interesting stats. If you take out the bad weather games, right? There was a really bad weather game that Brock Purdy had to play, and like the no offense in that game did anything. Quarterback leaders for the final 12 weeks of the season. #1 was Lamar Jackson. #2, Josh Allen. #3 was Brock Purdy, who was just 0.2 points behind Josh Allen for #2. Brock Purdy, the past month of the season, when you remove his one bad weather game, was a top 3 fantasy quarterback, virtually tied with Josh Allen for the second best quarterback finish those final 12 weeks. And this is not just luck. He's done it for 3 seasons, fantasy points per dropback. Kyle Shanahan as his offensive coordinator surely matters a lot, yes. The system matters a lot, yes, but Brock Purdy is quality. All that put together, strong performances is what you're going to get from Brock Purdy. And then you just look at what you're going to work with this year. It's going to be better than last year, right? Like, you still have George Kittle there. Okay, you had George Kittle there last year. You're going to be getting Brandon Ayuk at some point this year. Let's say Brandon Ayuk, they're saying maybe week 6. Okay, if he comes back week 6, that's more than you had him last year, right? When he missed the whole second half of the season. You have Juwan Jennings. You have Ricky Pearsall, who finally seems healthy as your wide receivers. The biggest addition is that you're going to get Christian McCaffrey, and okay, sure, lose Deebo Samuel. I'd rather have Christian McCaffrey in this offense. I'd rather have those yards after the catch abilities out of him, who looks healthy right now. And oh yeah, not to mention, according to Ryan Heath over on from Fantasy Points on Twitter, if you look at this, Brock Purdy currently draws the 3rd easiest schedule in the NFL in terms of fantasy points or in terms of projected wins and defenses so far this year. That's a nice situation to be in right now. So Brock Purdy, the way that I look at it, this is a guy who in his career has only thrown 444 and 455 times in his 2 seasons. If there's a world where this guy gets like 500 or 520 pass attempts and they have to play from behind in some games, now you're looking at a situation where Brock Purdy can maybe threaten to be a top 5 quarterback overall because he just gets more volume and he already has the efficiency. So I love targeting Brock Purdy right now. He goes as the 97th overall player, often in like the 8th or 9th round of fantasy drafts. I think that's a great spot to be getting him later in those drafts. If you want to look at this as well, you can look at this tweet from Hayden Winks right here. Right now, the 49ers are projected for 25.1 real life points per game. That's only behind the Ravens at 25.2 and the Bills at 25.3. So basically virtually tied for the highest points per game. So the best offense in the NFL right now is what Vegas is projecting. I'll take my bets on the best offense in the NFL with Kyle Shanahan as like a 9th round fantasy quarterback. I like that. Now let me ask you something quick. Do you ever get to the point in your work week where you just think, I need something to look forward to? For me, that's been checking out Yankees games lately, because there's nothing like being at a stadium, grabbing a beer, and watching Aaron Judge launch a 450-foot home run. Which is why I want to give the sponsor of today's video, SeatGeek, a huge shout out. With over 28 million downloads, they are the #1 rated ticketing app, and for good reason. They've got tickets for over 70,000 events, concerts, sports, festivals, you name it. Now, I love using SeatGeek because they make the whole experience dead simple. I just pop open the app, and what I love is they actually rate every ticket from 1 to 10, so you know if it's a good deal. Green dot equals good, and red equals not so much. Plus, every ticket is backed by their buyer guarantee, and you know that I had to come through for you all. You can use code VETRI10 for 10% off your next set of tickets over on SeatGeek. That's 10% off any tickets, any amount, when you use code VETRI10 on SeatGeek now. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later on. Thank you, SeatGeek, for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back into it. Now, the 4th player that I think is one of the best picks in fantasy this year is actually Jalen Waddle, which you might not think because I haven't really been too vocal about this one, but I've been sharing this secret for you and waiting for it for right now, you beautiful people. Because here's the deal. On the surface, Jalen Waddle scoring 10 fantasy points per game, and if you had this guy last year, you couldn't even start him, like ever. You can never start this guy. He was the wide receiver 50 in fantasy points overall per game. He was the he only had 2 receiving touchdowns. I mean, all this was pretty atrocious. If you just scroll over on Player Profiler to basically all of his stats last year, they were almost career lows in terms of like total usage. He dealt with some injuries, but only 5.5 targets per game. Only a 16% target share is not great. That's 57th in the NFL. His target rate, how often he was targeted per route run, only 18%, 72nd in the NFL. He had way more competition for targets from guys like Jonnu Smith almost out of nowhere. Devon Achane became a massive target out of the backfield as a pass catcher. Obviously, Tyreek Hill was still there. So these are some of the reasons for the lack of production for Jalen Waddle. But again, this offense just never got going. Tua got hurt. At times, Tyreek battled injuries. Obviously, himself, Jalen Waddle, was hurt. Like, it was just all over the place. But if we could take some good things out of this, Jalen Waddle still was able to produce over 2 yards per route run last year. So despite despite all that bad stuff, he himself was still relatively efficient. And you could see that right here in this tweet by Derek Brown on Twitter. In games which he played, Jaylen Waddle at least 70% of the snaps and Tua played, Waddle posted 2.1 yards per route run, about 65 receiving yards per game, which is solid. Like, that's way better, like double than when he did in those other games when Tua wasn't playing, right? So this was still an efficient receiver when Tua was there. He just had more target competition and a broken offense. But now a chunk of that target competition is gone. As you can see in the team changes tracker over in my fantasy blueprint at jointheblueprint.com, you could check it out. The big move right here, Jonnu Smith is now gone. He was obviously traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers if you follow football at all, which means 111 targets are now gone. And a lot of these targets were the short, intermediate parts of the field, middle of the field were Jaylen Waddle, who also produces downfield, but a lot of his production is those crossing routes, middle of the field type stuff. And now Jonnu Smith is gone. More opportunity probably for Waddle. And let's not just count one bad season against him. This is a guy who had over 1,000 receiving yards every year of his career to start his career, right? You're talking about 70 receptions every single season, and he did it in totally different ways, right? The first year he comes into the league, he's kind of just like a check down merchant, averaging less than 10 yards per catch. Then his second year, he's a downfield weapon with over 18 yards per reception, 1,300 yards. Then his third year, his first year with Tyreek Hill, he kind of balances it out, right? He gets a little bit of the downfield work, middle of the field work. He shows you in his first 3 years in the league that, okay, yeah, I could be a short area target, I could be a deep target, or I could do both of those things. And then last year, let's cut the guy some slack. 3 good years, 1 down year where he's banged up and the offense stinks and his quarterback's hurt. You head into this year now and you already know the target competition. It's basically the same. It's Tyreek Hill, who is now 30 plus years old, and there's a lot of signs here just based on his own play and separation stats at getting open per reception, perception, and Matt Harmon. You could check it out. Tyreek's play himself is going a little bit downhill. He's saying a bunch of stuff in the media right now that is just very weird, like all off season, including this year, like kind of just calling out his own teammates in like joking ways, but they seem kind of like backhanded compliments, right? Malik Washington, they get Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Like, none of these guys are target competition. You talk about the tight ends now with Jonnu Smith gone. They signed Darren Waller. If you're thinking Darren Waller's just going to step in and be Darren Waller from like 7 years ago with the Raiders, you're probably mistaken, because this is a guy who retired from football. Even when he did not retire, he was still dealing with injuries every single year, like somewhat chronic injuries. And now he's coming back after not playing football for nearly like a year and a half to 2 years. And I'm supposed to expect that this guy's going to just be good and in football shape. No, I'm not really buying that for Darren Waller. I think the guy's very wise. He thinks that he could probably get another 1 to 3 years in the NFL and maybe get some more money and contracts and incentives and maybe a guaranteed money here and there. So I think he's coming back, right? But for the most part, I'm not expecting a lot of production out of Darren Waller, a guy who can't block at all, and I don't really think he's going to be that involved as a receiver or pass catcher. And if you want to just look at this tweet again here from Hayden Winks, if we scroll down to Miami, now they're not projected for a ton of points per game. They're about middle of the pack at 21.5, but this number right here, 35.7, is what they're projected to pass per game this year. And if you scroll out, there's one team that's higher in the Bengals, 2 teams that's higher in the Chiefs, and that's about it. Right now, the Miami Dolphins are projected to be top 3. If you want to look across different sources, wherever you look, they're basically top 5 everywhere in pass attempts per game. If that's the case, who does that help? The receivers. They're going to see more targets per game. And let's just imagine a world where the 30-plus-year-old wide receiver and Tyreek Hill misses some time with injuries like he's missed in the past years. Then Jaylen Waddle is now the wide receiver 1 on this team. So I'm a fan of where Jaylen Waddle goes right now. He goes to the 73rd overall pick. And this is just what we're talking about. Like, this range of the draft, we've already talked about guys who go in this range, like a George Pickens. Tetairoa McMillan goes like 10 picks before that or so. This range of the draft, round 6 and 7, is where you can just absolutely load up on wide receivers. Sometimes Jaylen Waddle, depending on your platform, will fall into round 7 of drafts, right? And now you're in a range where you can go round 5, Tetairoa McMillan, round 6, George Pickens, round 7, maybe a Jaylen Waddle. That feels great. And it also feels great. We're at the 2-3 turn in fantasy drafts, especially as my 3rd round pick sometimes. I can land Chase Brown, who had one of the quietest RB3 finishes to a year last year. You've probably seen this if you watched this channel this summer, but if not, the final 8 games. So this is split up on RotoViz for his first 8 games on the right side of the screen, final 8 games on the left side of the screen. This is when Chase Brown took over as the RB1 the second half of the year. Zach Moss dealt with injury. Zach Moss has since been released from this team. Chase Brown averaged over 20 points per game, over 110 total yards per game between his receiving and rushing, and over 23 touches per game. He also led every single running back playing 85% of the snaps. He had at least 90 total yards in every single one of those outings, some massive receiving performances as well. Chase Brown was a 3-down workhorse back. He was like prime Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler style player. I mean, this dude looked legit, and as you can see right here, once he started to get 80+% of the snaps that second half of the season, according to PPR Fantasy Tips over on Twitter, he had the #1 rate in terms of rush attempt share in his backfield, #2 in terms of route participation, how often he ran a route per his team's drop back, and was top 5 in target share, earning 12.5% of his team's targets, which is impressive in general. Top 5 for target share, but it's even more impressive when you're competing with Triple Crown winner Jamar Chase for targets and top 5 fantasy producer in points per game T. Higgins for targets. So yeah, Chase Brown is going to be a monster this year, and let's just look at it. Like, this Bengals team and this organization loves to feed workhorses. Joe Mixon, remember him when he was on the Bengals? Let's scroll back to his seasons when he was with the Bengals here. Oh, what do you know? In his healthy seasons, 292 carries, 212, 257. That's not even factoring in these productions right here of 40 plus, 60, 52 plus receptions. This is a guy who was averaging well over 300 touches per game in his final 3 years, healthy seasons with the Cincinnati Bengals. That could be the type of role Chase Brown in his prime, he's built for it size-wise, can do this year with Cincinnati. If you look at the backfield competition, I mentioned Zach Moss was released. Samaje Perine, they brought back to this team. He was formerly a part of the team in the Bengals years ago. He spent time with the Chiefs last year. Not worried about a 30-year-old running back. Not worried about a 6th-round pick, Taj Brooks. Everything we're seeing right now, including the preseason usage, is that Chase Brown is just the guy here. There's no doubt about it. Everything that's coming out of camp from the coaches, the offensive coordinators. I mean, look at this right here. Offensive coordinator Dan Pitcher said he's committed to making Chase Brown a superstar this year. He would then go on to reference like Austin Eckler as a style that you could think about when they want to use Chase Brown this year. Prime Austin Eckler, like 3-down back, pass catching back, maybe catch, upwards of 70 or 80 plus balls would be insane for Chase Brown, but that's the type of role that offensive coordinator Dan Pitcher envisions. He said he wants to make Chase Brown a household name this year, and he will be a focal point of the offense. I'm sure every single content creator has been saying Chase Brown's a great pick because this is just one of the obvious ones in my opinion. At the 2-3 turn, he's obvious. He's obvious if you can get him in round 3. Competitive leagues, you'll probably have to take him in round 2 as a top 20 pick, and I think that's completely fine. Chase Brown is a top 10 running back for me this year easily. He is a player that if I can start my drafts somewhere in the range of, let's just say you're in a home league where you have multiple flex spots and it's kind of in your best interest to go and get a running back or receiver instead of a quarterback because you have to fill those flex spots. That's just kind of part of the strategy there, the opportunity cost at those different positions. So there's a little tip for you. But if you start your draft again, that's what we've been saying, elite running back. Let's say you get Christian McCaffrey in round 1. Round 2, you're able to land like an AJ Brown, a Drake London, and then round 3 you can get a Chase Brown. You're talking about 3 of like the most high volume players with so much upside in the league in your first 3 picks. That feels amazing. And another player who kind of fits that mold is Nico Collins of the Houston Texans, who last year when he was healthy, this guy was a beast. You can see where he finished overall. A great finish. For the second straight season, he was a top 8 fantasy producer, putting up 17.6 fantasy points per game. He was the wide receiver 8 last year. His efficiency was absolutely absurd. He ranked 3rd in the NFL in yards per route run, and he was top 5 in explosive play rate and has the highest PFF receiving grade out of any receiver the past 2 years. And oh yeah, he was actually better in the beginning of the season when he had harder competition, which is crazy, in Tank Dell and Stefon Diggs, who are now not going to be there this season. Because if you want to look at those first 5 games, of which, by the way, Nico Collins actually left the 5th game early, but he was even productive before leaving that game. Nico had over 21 fantasy points per game, top 3 amongst receivers, 9 targets per game, 113 yards per game. Again, this was a game in which he actually left the 5th game early, so this isn't even a full 5 games. This is like 4.5 games. He was on pace. The dude was on pace for 1,900 receiving yards. You want to look at how he produced last year. Best average separation score on vertically breaking routes in 2024, so he's going downfield and he's breaking in across the middle of the field. Nico Collins, number 1 in the NFL. You want to know what his new offensive coordinator, Nick Haley, wants to do this year? Use vertically breaking routes. Oh, what a match made in heaven. Nico Collins, the best in the NFL at it last year, and they want to do even more of that. That makes sense. Now, I mentioned he's not going to have those guys to compete with this year because Tank Dell's likely, and they're already expecting to miss the entire year, maybe even more than that, with his injury he suffered last year against the Dallas Cowboys, I believe on Thanksgiving that was. And then you can see right here as well, Stefon Diggs, he's not going to be on this team either. He's now the number 1 receiver for the New England Patriots as of now. Biggest competition brought in was Christian Kirk. That is definitely a piece of competition. Jaden Higgins in the 2nd round, Jalen Noel in the 3rd round. Okay, these are all players that are going to be quality players in my opinion in the NFL, but none of them, in my opinion, are going to be taking significant target share away from Nico Collins, who last year, while competing with better players in Tank Dell and Stefon Diggs, was still earning an elite target share above 25%. I think he could push towards 30+% this year. And I know that the Texans have some offensive line issues, but they had these issues last year and Collins was still able to produce at an elite level, so I'm not concerned about that. I mentioned Nick Haley's the new offensive coordinator. He basically has been emphasizing all offseason, he wants to get his playmakers the ball, and he wants to build this offense around explosiveness. Let me just say one thing right now. Let's look at the Texans offense right now. Is Christian Kirk a playmaker? I don't know. Are the rookies playmakers? Maybe. It's yet to be seen. Joe Mixon is back battling an ankle foot injury that as of this recording, we don't know what's up with it. It seems a lot worse than the team is letting on. Who's the other playmakers on this team? I can tell you right now, it's not the current version of Nick Chubb. I can tell you right now, it's not the backup rookie running back Woody Marks. It is Nico Collins, and that is it. It's not Dalton Schultz. It's Nico Collins. They're going to get the ball in this guy's hands as much as possible. He might catch 100+ balls this year. So when I look at it in Nico Collins in the 2nd round, like a lot of people like the late picks in the drafts this year. I don't mind them. I personally prefer like round pick 5 or 6 if I could choose. But if you're in like, pick 11 or 12, if you end up being there, not a bad spot to be. Imagine starting your draft with somebody like, even if you wanted to start with 2 potentially 2nd round picks, like Nico Collins and Devon Achane as your first 2 picks, that feels really good. Nico Collins and Malik Neighbors, just load up on wide receivers and basically guarantee yourself 300 targets if these guys stay healthy. That feels pretty good as well. Now, if you want to see exactly where I have Nico Collins and the rest of my top 50 overall players ranked completely free, you can check it out, link down below, or you can head to fantasyrankingsfree.com. That is fantasyrankingsfree.com. Once there, we'll take you to this page where you just simply enter your email, and a couple minutes later, you'll get sent the top 50 overall rankings. Be sure to check your spam and promotional folders. If you don't see it right away, that's where it usually goes for some people we found. But here's the thing. You're going to get those top 50 overall rankings tiered out with green and red showing you the best and worst picks in each round. Now, if you're a really serious fantasy player and you have a draft coming up very soon and you want my full top 250 overall rankings for your entire draft, all my other drafting tools, and my in-season tools to help you from draft day to championship week, well, that's why I built the Fantasy Blueprint. It's what I use in all my leagues, and over 10,000 people are currently using in their leagues. You can also check that out, link down below. It'll take you to this page, or you can just head to jointheblueprint.com. That is jointheblueprint.com. You'll learn a lot more about what's offered in the blueprint, the origins of it, and you can check out all these testimonials from people who used the product last year who are back yet again this year. Over 85% of people, nearly 9 out of 10 people who used the blueprint last year are back this year, which I think is just like the best statistic to show you that this is actually a good product. People used it enough last year to come back and get it again this year. So if you want to get the blueprint, you can head to jointheblueprint.com. It will help you schmack around your friends this year, and they'll start to ask you, how the heck did you get so good at fantasy almost overnight? Now, the best player who I consider one of the best picks in fantasy based on where he goes right now is Calvin Ridley, whose 2024 numbers do not tell the full story at all. You'll come in here and you'll see that he had 120 targets. Pretty solid. 7.1 targets per game is very respectable. A 24% target share is not elite by any means, but it's very good. This is a guy who actually led the NFL in air yards. He was top 5 in deep targets. He was being used downfield left and right, seeing those potential high opportunity touches where you can have these 20 or 30 plus yard receptions. But sadly, it did not pay off for him because his quarterbacks were Will Levis and Mason Rudolph. You could argue the worst quarterback combination in the NFL last year, which led to only 59% of this is insane. Only 59% of Calvin Ridley's targets were catchable last year, 97th in the NFL. That means over 40% of his targets weren't catchable. So let's just do some quick math here right now, right? Let's just do some quick math. He had 120 targets last year. This means almost 50, about 50 of these targets weren't even catchable. Imagine that. Imagine playing the game of NFL football and like 3 or 4 targets per game that you're getting for your quarterback are literally just going over your head or behind you. I'd get so frustrated, right? So this guy had 120 targets. He was getting open. He was actually producing when the targets were catchable. We just didn't see it all that often. But the hope is that that changes this year when there's going to be a quarterback upgrade we'll get into in a second, because I'm not worried about Calvin Ridley himself. I'm not worried that he's a little bit older. He came into the league as an older prospect. He missed like a 1.5 to 2 years with a gambling suspension and then taking off for mental health all in like the same 1.5 period. Like, he doesn't have that much wear on his tires, if you will. You can see Matt Harmon of Reception Perception, who we've referenced. He says based on Calvin Ridley's 2024 season, he was 73% versus man coverage, 79% success rate against zone, and he was 85th percentile against press. These are all a bunch of nerdy numbers to a lot of you. Let me just tell you, all of those are very good and much better than you probably expect that Calvin Ridley played last year. Way better than expectation. And even despite the terrible quarterback play, when he just got away from Will Levis for a stretch of games and Mason Rudolph took over for a stretch of games, over the final 11 weeks of the season in which Will Levis was injured during part of this, Ridley averaged 14.2 points per game, double what he was doing the first 6 weeks. He averaged 75 receiving yards per game, 2.5 times what he was doing the first 6 weeks. So over those final games, those final 11 games, Calvin Ridley was a borderline top 20 wide receiver in like one of the worst environments in football. But now he's not maybe going to be in one of the worst environments. That's the hope when you draft a number 1 overall pick Cam Ward, who reportedly in camp right now looks really good. We saw in the preseason, like week 1 looked good. Week 2 wasn't all that great, but I think like the starters only played, like 9 or 10 total snaps in that game. He completed a 35-yard pass to the rookie Alec Imanor. Like, we're not going to go off too much of this. The whole offensive line wasn't in. Calvin Ridley didn't even play in the second preseason game, right? But you're going to get a number 1 overall pick in Cam Ward, who led the nation last year in 20-plus yard completions and a lot of different deep passing categories. You combine that type of profile, a guy who was good downfield last year, with Calvin Ridley, who just saw so many deep downfield passes go over his head, maybe we start to get some connections now. And what's even better is, like, look at the competition here. A 32-year-old Tyler Lockett, not worried about that. Van Jefferson, who's bounced around the league at this point, not worried about that. Was with the Steelers, was with the Rams, never really stood out anywhere. Alec Imanor, a rookie who, he looked like he was getting some traction in the second preseason game. Maybe he's the wide receiver 4. Maybe he's competing with Van Jefferson for the wide receiver 3. Either way, this is not a guy I expect to come in and see like 30 or 40% of the targets. Xavier Estrepo is an undrafted free agent. He played with Cam Ward in college. I don't think that's going to really amount to anything, at least not right now. Another rookie in Shamir Deke has not really stood out too much in camp from what they're saying or preseason. It's just Calvin Ridley right now. And for what it's worth, like I said, Ridley did not play in the second preseason game for this team, but he did play in the first game. And this dude in that first game, I think he ran 7 routes, right? He played for like one or 2 drives. He ran 7 routes. Calvin Ridley was targeted on 3 of those 7 routes, 42% of the time. Obviously a small sample, but here's the deal. I would not be shocked if this dude who saw 120 targets last year with bad quarterbacks, I would not be shocked if the offense is better this year. They sustain drives more, they run more plays, and now he sees 150 plus targets. It reminds me a lot, and I've said this this before about Terry McLaurin heading into last year. What was the narrative on Terry McLaurin? Oh, he has terrible quarterback play. Oh, Terry McLaurin finished as the wide receiver 34 the year before Jayden Daniels. Then he gets better quarterback play with Jayden Daniels, a first-round pick, and he ends up finishing as a top 15 wide receiver, 15.8 points per game, career high in receiving touchdowns. Now, I don't know if Calvin Ridley's going to see a career high in receiving touchdowns, but I think there's a real world where this guy can go from finishing outside the top 30 receivers last year, like McLaurin, gets a first-round quarterback, a number 1 overall pick, and is now a top 15 fantasy option. So I am in on Calvin Ridley as the 71st overall player in drafts. And again, it's the same range of the draft. If you could walk out of like round 6 and 7 with some combination of Jalen Waddle, who we talked about, Calvin Ridley, who we talked about, and George Pickens, you obviously probably can't get all 3 of them unless one of them falls to round 8. If you can just get 2 out of these 3 guys, I feel good about that. And I also feel good if I'm landing Jalen Hurts in usually the 4th round of fantasy drafts right now. This is a guy who last year, believe it or not, this is actually a crazy stat. He was quote unquote disappointing last year. You heard it on the national TV broadcast, disappointing. You heard it from people frustrated in fantasy circles for his inconsistent play. And then you look up and at the end of the year, oh, he's averaging 21 fantasy points again for the 3rd straight season. Oh, 6th overall in fantasy points. Basically the same production he had the previous season when he was the number 2 quarterback in fantasy. It just so happens that there were some better quarterbacks that popped up this past year, right? You're talking about out of nowhere Baker Mayfield, out of nowhere Sam Darnold, out of nowhere Jayden Daniels, right? So 21 points per game, still pretty good for one Jalen Hurts when he only throws a career low 18 touchdown passes as a starter. And oh yeah, he also threw a career low as a starter right here, 361 attempts, nearly 200 less than his previous season because Saquon Barkley was running for over 2,000 yards and this team was one of the most run-heavy offenses we've seen in NFL history. But let's just imagine a world where this year they throw 10% more because based on just natural regression, they're not going to be back-to-back years a top 5 rushing team in NFL history, most likely. So we might get 10% more pass attempts, 30 to 50 more pass attempts for Jalen Hurts. That feels good. We know the rushing production will still be there, right? 42 yards per game rushing last year, despite competing with Saquon Barkley, who was ripping off all these explosive plays. Still had 14 rushing touchdowns thanks to the tush push, which, by the way, was not banned this offseason. Saquon Barkley is a guy who has now averaged 22 fantasy points per game over the last 4 years, and he's never finished outside the top 6 quarterbacks, which is where he finished last year. And you can look at this right here. In 4-point passing leagues, Jalen Hurts belongs in the same tier as Allen, Lamar, and Daniels, is what Dynasty Dad says on Twitter, and I would actually agree with this. He's number 1 in rushing fantasy points per game. He's 3rd in rushing yards the past 3 years, and he's 1st in rushing touchdowns. And oh yeah, during that time, Jalen Hurts led the NFL with the highest deep passing EPA. It helps a lot when you have Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown as your wide receivers. Basically, all that has to say is, right now, Josh Allen and Lamar go like 20 to 15 picks before Jalen Hurts. Jayden Daniels goes like 5 to 10 picks before. You can get Jalen Hurts at a pretty nice discount compared to those other guys. And if you look at this tweet right here, fantasy points per dropback is one of the most predictive quarterback stats according to Ryan Heath on Twitter. The top 6 in this stat since 2022. Number 1 is Lamar at 0.69. Number 2, virtually tied for number 1 with Lamar, is Jalen Hurts at 0.68. He's been one of the best fantasy quarterbacks, arguably up there with Lamar as the best fantasy quarterback these last 3 seasons. And now you don't have to spend a 2nd round or even a 3rd round pick most of the time on him like you do with the other elite quarterbacks. You can get him in round 4. And if he just gets those extra 10 to 15% pass attempts this year, you can see what you saw a couple years back in 2022 when he was throwing the ball, still had the rushing upside, throwing the ball about 460 times, right? And he finished as the wide or quarterback 1 in fantasy at 25.6 fantasy points per game. Really hard to ignore this type of production, especially when you consider he's behind a top 3 offensive line again. He still has the elite weapons that we've come to know at this point, right? And the A.J. Browns and the Devonta Smiths, one of the best, if not the best, some people could argue, wide receiver combination in the league when these guys are healthy. You also have Dallas Goedert in there. This is a nice situation. It's a nice situation when you then scroll down and see the Eagles are projected for 23.8 points this year. Easily top 10 in the NFL, right up there with this tier of being in like the top 5 in the NFL in points per game. I like this a lot. Oftentimes he goes as the quarterback 5. Sometimes you might even see Jalen Hurts fall to the quarterback 5 in drafts because right now he's currently going as the quarterback 5 on average. Now, some people will say he's never gone into the quarterback 5 in my 2 drafts that I did. Okay, the 2 drafts you did just happen to be 2 drafts, right? Joe Burrow on average right now goes 1 pick before Jalen Hurts in drafts. That is crazy. Bonkers. We did a quarterbacks video, the guys you should be taking instead. Most people are drafting the position wrong. Guys you should be taking instead. That was the title. You should always take Jalen Hurts ahead of Joe Burrow. It should never be a question. And you should also be targeting and strongly considering Christian McCaffrey as one of the top 6 picks in your fantasy draft. Yes, outside of, your tier of Jamar Chase, Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley. Honestly, right after that, start to consider CeeDee Lamb versus Christian McCaffrey as a top 4 or 5 pick. Now, before we get into why you should do that, just hit the subscribe button if you have not yet already. It takes literally just 2 seconds of your time. We're really close to 200,000 subscribers subscribers. That's my goal for this channel. And the more that you subscribe, the more people it shows it to. And it only, full circle, allows me to put out more content for you. I want to put out 5 videos a week. And right now we're putting out 4 a week, which we've never done. So I appreciate you all a ton. Hit that subscribe button. It takes 2 seconds. Okay, here's the deal. Christian McCaffrey only played 4 games last year. He left one of those games early. So only 3 games healthy last year due to injuries. But a lot of people are letting this recency bias push Christian McCaffrey down draft boards. This was the #1 overall pick in fantasy last year. And basically like every year for the last 3 or 4 years when he's been healthy. And now a lot of the times you can get him like outside the top 10, outside the top 8 picks in your draft. Insane. I mean, this is a guy, if you look at Urza Solomon's tweet on Twitter, it's like people forget what a fully healthy Christian McCaffrey has done for fantasy the past couple years when he's healthy. 2023, 21 touchdowns between his rushing and receiving yards, over 2,000 total yards, RB1 in fantasy. 2022, 13 touchdowns between his receiving and rushing, 1,900 yards, RB1 in fantasy, right? 2019, RB1 in fantasy with 1,000 receiving yards, over 1,300 rushing yards, 19 touchdowns, RB1 in fantasy. When he is healthy entering a season, he finishes as the RB1 or RB2 in fantasy every single year. I know he's another year older. I get that, but he didn't have a lot of carries last year. There's not a lot of wear on him from last year at all. And all the reports out of camp right now are that Christian McCaffrey looks healthy. Basically, since April, he's been going 100% in organized activities or in workouts, and then OTAs came and minicamp and now training camp. He's 100% healthy. Compared to his backfield right now, where Isaac Orendo's dealing with, I believe, a shoulder injury. He's expected to miss a couple weeks. Maybe by the time you're watching this, he's starting to come back. Jordan James is dealing with an injury. He's expected to miss a couple weeks, right? They had to go out there and re-sign Jeff Wilson, bring him back to this team. Christian McCaffrey, believe it or not, yes, this is true, is the healthiest running back in his backfield. All the other guys are injured, not him. And now he's entering a year where the team needs him more than ever. There's no Deebo Samuel. His whole backfield is hurt. Jordan Mason, his other backfield mate, was traded away, who was efficient last year. Brandon Ayuk is going to miss at least the first 5 to 6 weeks of the season, according to the head coach. Just butting in here because as I was editing the video, Brian Robinson got traded to the 49ers for a 6th round pick. Now, I don't think this matters at all for Christian McCaffrey. Has to do with the fact that their backup, their 3rd string, and their 4th string running back are all injured right now in San Francisco. A 6th round pick is nothing. I would assume that once Isaac Orendo is actually back from his shoulder injury, that he'll be the RB2 on this team. He has more juice than Brian Robinson. If Brian Robinson couldn't beat out Chris Rodriguez in a 7th rounder and Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, I don't think he's going to be a factor at all for Christian McCaffrey. This team needs to lean on Christian McCaffrey this year, and I think that's exactly what they're going to do. And it also helps that according to Ian Hartitz on Twitter, easiest running back schedules this year, James Conner, Alvin Kamara, #3, Christian McCaffrey. We'll take that. Oh, yes, we will. Christian McCaffrey, who goes as the 8th overall pick on average right now, I'd be taking him over Derrick Henry. I would consider taking him over Justin Jefferson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and CeeDee Lamb. That's how much I think he's good this year. I think you could argue that Christian McCaffrey should be the 4th overall ranked player behind Chase, Saquon, and Bijan, whichever order you want to put those 3 guys in, and then McCaffrey #4. I think you could do that because if we're talking about just upside wins championships in fantasy, yes, he has the highest upside out of any player in the draft. Meaning that if he is healthy, you have the chance to see 1,000 receiving yards, 70 plus catches, 15 plus touchdowns, and 1,000 plus rushing yards. I like that. And I also really like Omarion Hampton, who is easily one of the best picks in fantasy right now. This guy was a monster last year at UFC. Let's not forget it. Let's not forget what happened with Omarion Hampton last year at UFC and really the last 2 years at UFC. 1,500 rushing yards 2 years ago and 16 touchdowns. Over 1,600 rushing yards last year. An absolute beast. 6 yards per carry, 17 touchdowns. You factor in his receiving production, which was also very good. You see it right here at age 21, 38 receptions, 373 receiving yards, 11% target share. Anything above 7 is good for running backs. Above 10 is elite. So this was an elite pass catching running back, in my opinion, in terms of the volume and the ways they used him. Obvious producer on the ground, to the point where, according to my friend Austin over on Twitter, Hampton, his final 2 seasons of college, this is across 25 games, was averaging over 150 yards per game. You know, in fantasy, when you see like a guy in your team at 150 yards one week, maybe he gets 150 yards like 2 out of 3 or 4 weeks, and you're like, this guy's the best of all time. This guy across 25 games was averaging 150 yards and 1.3 touchdowns per game. Elite production, as good as it gets. He then goes to the combine, and at 220 pounds, a workhorse size back, goes out there, runs a 4.46 40, 94th percentile according to Player Profiler, 91st percentile burst. The guy was a beast. Athletic testing, production, can catch passes, lands with first-round draft capital in a good situation with the Chargers, who want to run the ball under Jim Harbaugh behind a solid offensive line. His biggest competition on the Chargers, Najee Harris, who before all of this stuff happened with Najee Harris's eye in the firework incident on July 4th, even then, Najee Harris was a guy who was known for getting 1,000 rushing yards every year because he never got hurt and would average like 55 to 60 rushing yards per game in his career. He was never overly efficient. He was never overly flashy. He was just a durable back who is now older. And now Najee Harris, as we know, had the incident on the 4th of July with fireworks that affected his eye. The last reports that we have of this is that Najee Harris participated in drills for the first time in training camp on Tuesday, right? So here's the thing. Those quote unquote drills ended up being him jogging on the sidelines. He was jogging for the first time since his incident. It took 6 weeks for Najee Harris to be able to jog on the sidelines to get his balance back, to be able to open his eye up enough, even if it is open at this point. They're saying that eye injuries only take like 3 to 5 to 7 days to heal, and the fact that it's taken 6 to 7 plus weeks at this point is a concern for honestly his vision long term, which, knock on wood, we hope that's not the case, but this is a serious thing. So yes, I do think Omarion Hampton, if he stays healthy as a rookie, is going to see 300 plus touches, and Najee Harris really won't be a factor in this backfield, honestly, to begin with, and now you're factoring in that he might only have one eye, which is crazy. There's obvious news that Rashawn Slater ended up getting injured. His patella tendon, I believe. He's going to miss the entire season. A big tackle, probably the best piece of this offensive line. That's a concern, but we should at least point out that this offensive line, if you look at this tweet right here from Ian Hartitz, most improved offensive lines this year. This was before that Rashawn Slater injury. Number 1, Chicago. Number 2, Minnesota. Number 3 was the Chargers. So this was an offensive line that was already going to be improved this year. I would say that they go from being a top 10 unit on paper entering the season to probably like 15th to 20th overall. So it's definitely a downgrade, but I don't think it's like catastrophic. And other people are concerned about this quote from Greg Roman. He said, this is the offensive coordinator, by the way, for the Chargers. He said, there will be a rotation no matter what happens about the backfield. The day of the one running back taking every rep is kind of gone the way that's been like prehistoric creatures. So people got concerned. Oh my God, even if Najee doesn't play, there's still going to be a backfield split. Come on, Iguodala, whoever else is back there. Are you serious? Let's look at Bijan Robinson last year, who was an absolute beast. This guy was an absolute monster last year. Towards the final 10 weeks of the season, he was the RB1 in fantasy. And you know what he did last year? He gave up 287 snaps to Tyler Algier. 25% of the workload in snaps last year went to Tyler Algier. This is obvious. No running back plays 100% of the snaps. No running back plays 90% of the snaps. Maybe one running back a year will play 80% of the snaps. Most of them are going to play between 60 and 70%, and other guys will be involved. This is obvious. Greg Roman is stating the obvious. Don't take it as something that's detrimental to Omarion Hampton. Instead, you should be targeting Omarion Hampton, where he currently goes as the 36th overall player in drafts. You can often get him in the 4th round of drafts, and I think that that's an absolutely great spot to be. If you have to take him in the 3rd round and you really want him, go ahead and do it, because he is one of the best players in fantasy this year. And there you have it. The 10 best picks as of this recording. Things can change, but as of this recording, those are the 10 best picks in fantasy drafts. Now, don't forget, link down below is my top 50 overall rankings, completely free. They're updated every week. They'll also update during the season for flex positional rankings each week, or you can also head to fantasyrankingsfree.com right now. Those are definitely going to help you with your upcoming drafts, and what will also help you is knowing the 7 players who can actually genuinely break fantasy football this year. I made a video about it. I think it's going to help you. You can check it out right here. These are the 7 guys who can genuinely break fantasy football.